I'm Paul Dutnall, CEO of WorkLife. We're a B Corp certified workspace provider in central London, Manchester and Reading, designed for businesses who know the right environment drives exceptional culture and supports high business performance. This is the Leader Circle podcast, recorded here in the Vault, which is our in-house podcast studio in WorkLife St Cross Street. The Leader Circle podcast is designed for business leaders, founders and CEOs to learn, to share experiences, and to hear from other leaders who are building and scaling their businesses. Today's guest is someone whose work sits right at the heart of what we talk about a lot here, which is the link between how people feel and how they perform. Bianca Errigo is the founder of HumanOS, a global speaker, one of the most credible voices in sustainable high performance around. You have over 13,000 hours of coaching, BSc in psychology, American Express's #1 external speaker. You've spoken for TikTok and Cambridge and Diageo and the NHS, amongst others, and a valued member of our community, our Leader Circle community here at WorkLife. Also, a direct challenge to the idea that high performance needs to come at a cost, which is going to be a big part of the conversation today. And for any founder or leader that's trying to build something great and sustainable, that is a leadership conversation I think is really worth having and really worth being a part of. So Bianca, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Paul. Excited to be in WorkLife and our first podcast together.
Exactly. And thanks for being here. We're super excited to get you on, particularly early on in this series, because your work and the things I know that you obsess about are so relevant to the people that hopefully this podcast is connecting with and useful for.
Yeah, great to be here.
And on that front, you've coached over 12,000 plus hours of executives.
Yeah.
And I wonder what that amount of time in the room with leaders teaches you that you can't learn any other way. What insights have you gained from those conversations?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And in my coaching career, I've coached such a range of, I guess, what we would call high performers, from your global CEOs dealing with multi-billion-pound companies, to your startup scale-up founders, to your professional sports athletes, to your sort of celebrities and the Hollywood world. And so high performance across a lot of different arenas. And you build up such a wealth of information and experience. I think you become incredibly talented at pattern recognition and understanding what someone's saying and what they're behaving, and often how different that can be. It gave me personally a really strong understanding of actually just how we are all quite simple human beings, which sounds really bizarre, but actually when you just sit with these people and you really get to know them as human beings, no matter what they've achieved or what they've done, so often people, I've never coached a leader or a high performer who's come to me because they're failing being quite a black or white term, but they're always on paper succeeding, but something is missing, and it's so often some form of human need that isn't being met for them. And so you really understand with that amount of coaching experience that you are often just dealing with human beings with previous traumas, with current challenges. No matter what we do or what we achieve, we're actually very similar. And so that understanding, and if it wasn't for that experience coaching, I don't think I would have ever have started or founded my own company, because you understand actually, and I'm sure you can resonate with this as well as a leader, at some point we all don't know what we're doing.
Absolutely. Most of the time.
Exactly. And so when you're speaking to these on paper really successful people, when you realise they are also in their minds winging what they are doing, yes, they can educate themselves, or they can get the experience, or they can implement the correct systems and processes. But actually, so often when we're high performers, we're doing something new each day. Every single day we're a little bit out of our comfort zone again, because that's what growth is and that's what we are there to do. And it's that understanding that you don't need to feel capable. You don't need to feel like you're necessarily ready, but the ability to do it anyway. And that was one of my biggest things working with these people. I was like, oh, actually, no one feels ready. And yet they do it.
Yes.
And so why can't I do the same?
And you spoke about people from so many different domains and disciplines there. On the subject of pattern recognition, how much does the domain play a role, and how much are the people you spend time with, no matter where they've come in from, broadly speaking, the same? How much is similar?
I think the vast majority is similar. The pressures are the same. They need to be able to perform in some capacity, whether that's making really heavy business decisions or whether that's on a professional sports pitch or whether that's in front of a camera. They need to be able to adapt. They need to be able to be under pressure effectively. They need to be able to have some capacity for what has happened outside their professional roles and be able to actually perform in life as well, particularly when we're looking at fulfillment and meaning and purpose. And so the arenas can change, but actually the problems are often extremely similar.
Yeah, we're going to talk a lot about high performance, but I guess to that point, a really relevant aspect is performance in what? You know, how do you define the things you're trying to perform in? And it's not all necessarily, you know, what professional performance or what you might think of. You know, you touched on some deeper definitions of what you might want to perform out there.
Yeah, exactly. And how long do you need to perform? Is this over a 5-year period? Is this over a 10-year period? Is this over a 30-year period? Like, what are you actually working towards here? And I guess like when we talk about that sustainable piece, like how sustainable does this need to be? Because that's when it's going to be variation.
Let's get into that because you don't just talk about high performance, you talk about sustainable high performance. What does that actually mean in your definition? And maybe how does it compare with what people think sustainable high performance or high performance means?
So at Human OS, we define sustainable high performance as an individual, team or organisation able to deliver consistently exceptional results without compromising certain areas. So we say without compromising well-being, without compromising work-life integration, which we'll probably come on to today, and without sacrificing their long-term happiness, effectively. So I believe it's often misunderstood. As soon as we say sustainable high performance, people think that means doing less or applying less force or being more balanced. And I hate the word balance, which is why we use the term integration. Or there's less so. I think more when you use the term well-being, there's this incorrect idea that this is something fluffy and it means wrapping people in cotton wool and it means taking the path of least resistance or avoiding stress, which is absolutely not what sustainable high performance is. It's how do we operate at an exceptional level, but we can do that day in, day out, week in, week out, month in, month out, year after year, decade after decade. And where a lot of people go wrong is they can perform at an exceptional level for a couple of years.
For a period, yeah.
Maybe a decade if they're lucky.
Yeah.
But there is going to be repercussions from not being able to manage yourself in a way that long term leads to this optimum result.
I liked your point on around wellness and maybe some of the connotations and what it actually can mean. I like to think of it as what's been useful for me is thinking about it as a bit of a continuum. Physical or mental or otherwise, through sickness, through wellness, through fitness, that you can perform all sorts of stages on a broad continuum, and there's always room to grow, and it's finding a sustainable level that's healthy and that drives you forward. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, we break it into sort of 3 main pillars: physical capacity, cognitive capacity, and meaning and purpose. And it's the meaning and purpose that people often overlook.
That's really interesting, that last category.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a bit more about why that is one of the kind of key 3, the trifecta?
Well,
you built to.
Okay, so a great example of this is, you're a really successful CEO and you've got the dream house and the dream car and the dream holidays and the dream title, and you're fundamentally unhappy. And you just don't understand why. If I've chased all these external anchor points that I've told myself will bring me this happiness, why am I unhappy? And it's often because they haven't focused on the meaning and the purpose within what they're doing as well. And now we have to be careful here because I don't want people to think they all have to be in jobs they really love. I don't think that is helpful to most people. I don't think it's realistic to most people.
Yeah.
But it does mean that we have to have an interest in what we are doing. And people often overlook the interest. And actually, when you look at the psychology of happiness and when you look at the psychology around fulfillment and meaning, and the data around people who actually do jobs they love. And I say this as a mission-driven founder. Am I the happiest I've ever been? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And when you look at other people who are really like mission driven in what they do, actually they tend to have lower happiness levels because they're so obsessed with the mission they are on. But often that mission is quite far from the reality that they're living. And so it can be very deflating. But we see the happiest individuals are the people who have a genuine interest in what they're doing. Because then when challenges arise or when things go wrong, they are able to adapt more effectively because they're actually interested in trying to achieve the outcome. And so we look at meaning and purpose because you can have your physical health where you need to have it, and that's really, really important. And we know that as people who are really into our fitness, but what that does for energy, what it does for your brain, what it does for your sleep, but also things for communication, patience, like actually resilience, like all the other areas that we don't.
There's something really powerful in consistently doing something that's quite hard and uncomfortable, and
teaching yourself you can do hard things, and teaching yourself because you're in pain, it doesn't mean back off. It actually sometimes means lean into that. The cognitive capacity, because yes, no matter what arena you are in, how can you perform at your best if you don't have the cognitive ability to do so? If you can't think strategically, if you're not making good decisions, if you're not self-regulating, if you're not able to take a step back from a situation and think about what is the outcome we are trying to achieve, what is the most effective way to get there? And that's particularly important again at the moment because we're inundated with information, pace of change, the amount of decisions we're having to make. But then if you have both those things in place, but you do not have meaning and you do not have purpose, there is going to be no long-term sustainability because you will burn out. Burnout's not just from working too hard. Burnout's actually from having a lack of
interest
as well. Yeah.
Do you mind if we break those three down a little bit? And I appreciate we're talking in a general sense here, but what advice would you have to give to somebody who is thinking about, okay, I buy into those three domains. How can I bring more physical capability, mental capability, meaning and purpose into my day-to-day?
It's about understanding what's your starting point as well. We had a conversation, one of the talks recently here, didn't we, around very interesting point that someone brought to the room around making it mandatory that everyone does was it a 10K a week or something? Yeah,
we were talking about, what's the organisation's role in intervention or not in this case.
And I was like, it's a fantastic point and I completely understand where they're coming from. And as someone who is very fitness orientated, I understand the benefits you are trying to achieve for your people, but you have to understand where most people are starting at. So I think the general advice first is understand what your starting point is. Often, and I saw this in my coaching a lot, people think in intensity, whereas we need to start thinking consistency. Consistency means you can do it day in, day out. So intensity, I need to go do this high rocks, or I want to do this Ironman, or I want to do this marathon, as opposed to I need to walk an extra 2,000 steps a day every single day, or I need to add 20 minutes of movement into my lunchtime to make sure I'm not sitting at my desk from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. And again, the data is really interesting here because we can see even in people who exercise 5 or 6 times a week, actually, if they are sat at their desk all day post that exercise, they have the same risks as someone who's not exercising.
Yeah, isn't that fascinating?
It's
and
crazy.
You step back and think about it, okay, well, you're potentially only moving for 6 hours a week there.
Yeah,
6.5
exactly.
Week,
and our bodies just weren't designed to be sat and the cortisol to build. So I think it's about, it's understand where is your starting point.
Yeah.
Think consistency over intensity, and then don't underestimate starting small. 20 minutes.
And movement.
Yeah, exactly. And so that really is going to help with the physical. And then that tends to, once you've got the movement, I think, which is like the sort of foundations, you then tend to start eating better. You then tend to start sleeping better. And so that has that domino effect.
There's a really lovely virtuous cycle there, isn't it?
Yeah.
That these things tend to reinforce each other and go together. And you have that incentive and that motivation and the momentum across lots of areas. I definitely feel that.
And what's really not thought about enough when it comes to exercise, again, particularly in the modern world we find ourselves in, and how much feels out of control and how much is changing and how quickly that's changing. And so for a lot of this audience as business leaders or leaders, like how much you're having to adapt every single day, potentially. it's that feeling of control. It's knowing you have woken up and you have done something for you and you have taken control of an outcome that you are prioritizing yourself, and actually what that subconsciously tells your brain, so that when you go through your day and everything else feels out of control, your brain's still going to feel in control because you've moved in the way you've told yourself you'll move, you're eating in the way you've told yourself you will eat, you're recovering in the way you've told yourself.
You can affect these outcomes. You can create these things.
And it becomes like a
yourself.
superpower.
Yeah.
Because it makes you feel like you have a sense of certainty in a world that can feel really uncertain. And that is so important right now. The cognitive capacity, again, so a lot of particularly founders, high performers, they're really good at exercising, really good at eating well. They're not as good at actually recovering, understanding that you can't go 110 miles an hour all of the time and expect there to be no repercussions from that. And so your cognitive capacity, that mental capacity, what are you doing to actually re-energize your brain? What are you doing to allow your brain to process all of the information it is having to process on a daily basis right now, so that you are making the most strategic, the most effective decisions? This again can look really different for different people. We try and really promote people taking time away from tech, ensuring that they do actually have a day off. Again, it doesn't have to be transformative, huge, life-changing things, but it's about small little boundaries. For me personally, I will not look at my phone for the first hour of my day. I just won't. I don't want to be inundated with emails, WhatsApps, LinkedIn, whatever it may be, before I've even had a chance to get out of the house and walk my dog. Because how can I think clearly if I've not even created the space to take the information in?
Yeah.
And then with the meaning and purpose, this one is harder because this really requires a certain level of introspection. It's really, who am I? What are my values? What are my business values? How do these things align? How do I want to show up? How do I want to move through this world? What am I truly interested in? And that can be more challenging and more complex. And usually that does require some form of support or a really good ChatGPT prompt, which more people are doing now, I guess.
By support, you mean maybe coaching or mentoring or some advice up front to even just to mirror your own thinking.
Yeah, or even like similar with and this is not a plug, but with the work-life leadership circles, being around like-minded others where you can have those communications and that conversation. Because yes, coaching, I would always promote and say absolutely, especially as the stakes get bigger and bigger. But I also understand that's not a luxury everyone can afford, which why my business exists, right, to make that the case. But if that isn't a possibility for you, actually, again, not underestimate the power of being around like-minded others. It's
so important to be able to vocalize it and bounce it around, outside of you.
Yeah.
And whether it's our leader circle or another forum, I think if you're listening to this and you're in a leadership position or you're a founder of a business, or having a circle around you that can identify with the challenges you've got, firstly, and secondly, you trust enough to be able to vocalize and bounce things around, and also know that you're going to get good challenge. It's not just cheerleading. I've found that incredibly powerful.
Yeah, exactly.
And I know you're in several circles that kind of give you some of that influence as well.
And it's just the reality is so many are lonely. When you asked me that first question, what have you seen a lot? I can't even tell you the number of conversations I've had around loneliness with these people who are always surrounded by people because of that disconnect between what they have to portray to the world and what they feel inside.
That's super interesting. Do you think that contributes to the sustainability point?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, exactly. If you're feeling misunderstood and if you're feeling isolated, that's eventually then going to have such a huge impact on your physical health, on your mental capacity, and your meaning and purpose. And so, again, we live in this world that's so hyper-connected, but also it's made us so disconnected. Like, how often do we stop to actually just have a genuine conversation with someone? How often when we're with our partners are we looking at our emails? How often when our children are talking to us are we thinking about our to-do?
Yeah, being present is in itself a difficult thing.
Yeah, and then you add that onto
in modern life,
the pressure of being a leader and what you have to portray to your teams, what you have to portray to your customers, what you have to portray to your investors, and then actually what you're going.
So how do you do that? How do you compartmentalize or organize things even in your own head or in your routines or your habits or even your sort of energy phasing? How would you recommend to someone you're working with they set themselves up so that they can be really focused on their business when they should be really focused on family, being present and where their feet are, where they need to be? What advice do you have for somebody who finds that is a struggle?
Yeah, it's a great question. And again, it's not there isn't an easy fix to this, because it requires, I think firstly, it actually requires a dissociation in identity. And what I mean by that is, and I speak about this a lot because it's something I am so guilty of, as a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of founders, a lot of successful, high-performing people have got to where they are through trauma. I have never listened to a podcast of a successful person who said, yeah, I sit on this multi-billion pound business because I had such a nice, easy life. Everything was so fun and I just ended up here. Like, we often have something to prove, and that's great because it gives us this level of tenacity and this level of resilience. And so when everyone else quits, we're like, we are only just getting started. You have no idea who I am, what I need to do here. Yeah, exactly. And so that's a great thing to a certain point. But then if that becomes so controlling that your whole self-worth is associated with how well your startup's doing or how well your business is doing, or if you're hitting your sales targets or if you're scoring goals or whatever it may be, then it becomes hugely detrimental.
And this is your point on disassociation. That can't be your identity.
It can't. You have to have an identity out of what you do for work.
Yeah.
And if you're not able to dissociate those two things, there's no way you're able to be present. Because if everything you associate yourself with is tied up into the outcomes of your business, how are you going to sit at that dinner with your partner? How are you going to have that conversation with your children? How are you going to enjoy that night out with your friends? You're not just going to constantly be thinking about this business. So the step one is actually learning, who are you outside of your work? And what's even harder than that, why are you enough without having to achieve?
Exactly. That's a really difficult question for people who are high achievers. People who have built, I suppose, a modus operandi around that, because you learn to lean in on that. You learn that identity, you embrace it because it gets you, it gets you where it's got you.
And this is exactly it. They're terrified. If I no longer think like this, if I no longer operate like this, well, what if I'm not motivated? Or what if I don't have this resilience? And my argument always for that has been, if you have achieved all of this through being that difficult with yourself, through being that punishing of yourself, imagine what you could achieve through being kind to yourself. And again, I never use the term being kind because it's got those fluffy connotations for people like, oh, why don't we be kind, or self-compassion? But actually, what could you achieve if you truly believed in yourself, just for believing in yourself's sake? And that piece of work alone can take years. That's not something you just are able to change overnight.
Absolutely.
But
it's an identity shift.
Exactly. Yeah. But that's the first most important step to then, how do we become more present outside of work? Because suddenly these things outside of work become so much more important again.
One of the things we talked about in our circles, and I think we've chatted about as well, is which I quite like in this space, is it's a framework by Dan Sullivan and Ben Hardy, and it's called The Gap and the Gain. And the basic principle is, rather than focusing where we ordinarily would focus, which is the gap from where we are today to this hypothetical place we want to be. And we all know that whatever targets or goals or aspirations you set for yourself, if you're probably everybody, but certainly if you're this type of person that we're describing, those goalposts move every time.
Exactly.
And if you get there, your target, your horizon will be out there in the future somewhere. Yeah. And instead measuring backwards and looking at the gain, looking at the progress you've made from a starting point. And even that reframe, I find, does a good job of balancing. You still have that bite and that drive to go forward, but you have a level of, you use the word kindness, recognition of what you have accomplished and how capable you are on that journey. And so certainly from my experience, and I'm absolutely a work in progress on this, but some of those tools that are out there that I can grab hold of and use to kind of help me reprogram a little bit how I'm thinking about things can be really, really useful. And that's one that stuck with me.
Yeah, it's so powerful. And when I think about, again, it's sort of the top performers I've seen or studied, they understand exceptionally well how to play the game of speed. And so what I mean by this is, they know when they have to be accelerating. They know when they have to be slowing down. They know when they have to get the team in to change the tyres or to refuel. They know when they have to have off seasons, pit stops. And that's then how they know that they take that podium. The ones who crash and burn are the ones who think they can accelerate the whole time and just keep on going and going and going at this level and not expecting a crash. And so we fear so much slowing down because we misconceive slowing down to be going backwards. But actually, if we implement that hour without your emails on your phone, that tech-free day, that mandatory having dinner with a friend or with your partner or with your children and no distractions, and understanding this doesn't mean we're slowing down. This means we're recharging, we're taking a pit stop so we can go double the pace when we come out of this lane.
And this is the time horizon point,
Yeah.
right? This is saying over a 5, 10, 20-year
Yeah.
stretch, how much have you accomplished?
Exactly.
Not 5, 10, 20 days.
Yeah, exactly.
I was going to ask you, and you're answering it, but if you have any other advice for people, that I'm interested in that analogy from sports where there's practice day, there's match day, there's recovery day, there's, you have that phasing, that undulation of energy level and focus that compounds. How you apply that to a business context, which feels like it has different behaviors, but essentially what you're saying is you can apply the same ideas into how you perform over a long period of time in a business context as well.
Yeah, in the business context at Human OS, we use what we call like a weather system. So for each business, we'll understand what season they are in, and then we support them in adapting their teams and their work rates and what levels of flexibility they have, and different ways to then basically adapt to the seasons, as opposed to it's 110 all year round, all of the time, which quite often just lands in catastrophe.
It's an unsustainable pace.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So getting smarter with tapping in and tapping out. We say moving from a me to we mentality and having more of a team orientation towards high performance. And this can take into account anything. This can take into account like really high busy seasons for work. This might take into account someone who's going through a parent's illness. It might take someone into account who is got financial challenges. Like, it's being realistic about the diversity of needs and challenges in today's workforce. And as a business, making sure you're staying ahead of them by being proactive about the strategies you put in place, as opposed to reacting when things go wrong. And you look at global engagement. Global engagement in the workforce is 21%.
Yeah.
Europe's 13%.
Yeah.
UK's 10%. We're 33 out of 38 countries. And so businesses are hemorrhaging money on presenteeism. We've never seen anything like it. And so where we really try and get business to understand is like the tangible ROIs of actually taking these things seriously, of people feeling supported, of people feeling developed, of psychological safety. What are the foundations we are putting in place that allows for high performance? Psychological safety being the number one predictor of high performance.
Psychological safety.
Psychological safety.
Yeah.
Google.
That's the foundation, right?
Yeah,
that's the foundation of everything that comes next.
Exactly.
You have to have that.
Exactly. Businesses often say, we want innovation, or we want disruption, or whatever it might be. And actually then, that's great, fine, don't we all? But if your people do not feel safe to take risks at work, if they do not feel safe to speak up, if they do not feel like they can engage in healthy conflict, then how are you going to get disruption? How are you going to get innovation?
Well, the basic premise with disruption and innovation is taking risks, is trying things, is creating and playing and experimenting. And the art of experimentation is knowing that most of it's going to go wrong.
Yeah.
But you're going to learn from those scenarios, those failings, to create something that succeeds. And you can't do that if you're fearing those failings.
Yeah.
And we talked about it with Matt, and we had Matt on the podcast to talk about some of the data within the Happiness Index report.
Super interesting.
And this backs up all of this. It validates all of this.
Exactly.
You can't have creativity without psychological safety.
Totally. And I think businesses really struggle now, where so many businesses, particularly more like enterprise level, more, the older, the more archaic, they work in such outdated systems. They're still working in systems that were set up for an industrial revolution where it was hours equal output, but we're not. We're moving from like an information revolution to an AI revolution. And so how we need people working and the ways we need them to work and the processes and the environments we need to create for the best work are so different to what they were 5 years ago, 10 years ago, let alone 50 years ago, which so many organizations are still based on. And so it's, how are you modernizing actually the world we are now living in? And how are you giving people that empowerment to feel like they are creating something and part of something that they actually want to do their best work? And how do they have the energy to do so?
So I think we've naturally moved from an individual sustainable high performance to team high performance, team sustainable high performance. I'm intrigued by that idea. This potentially is an unfair question, but in your mind, what if you were designing from zero again, how should an organization think about setting up and running in 2026? Again, not tethered to the ways things were done in the past, embracing, you talked about output being ultimately what we're looking for. How do you design from output now in a modern era?
Yeah. We sort of look at three main areas: integration, belonging, development. And these are sort of three areas coming up time and time again in data, World Economic Forum, Gallup, Deloitte. What are people now looking for from a workplace that actually motivates them?
Yeah.
All of these things have work-life balance. Again, I hate that term, but work-life balance has surpassed pay for the past 3 years in a row more as the number one motivator. And so as a business, you need to look at, how am I integrating these things? And so if we break them down, integration, this is what people call balance. Balance to me creates this sense of having to have these perfect scales of these two opposing forces that you always have this correct. And it's just so unrealistic. You're not going to have balance in 2026. Get a grip. This is just not going to happen. But we can have integration. So some weeks, months, years, one work might need more. Some weeks, months, years, life outside of work might need more. But what people do need is the trust and the ownership to be able to build their days around whatever part they are in, and trusted that they can do their best work through doing.
So a big element is autonomy for people to design from what they need.
Exactly.
And can you give people the tools, the frameworks to be able to do that well on their own terms?
And and then it comes down to trust. It's you as a business. What do you require from these people? What goals do you need to be hit? What outcomes do you need to be met? And what are the core components of that there cannot be flexibility, because it is a business at the end of the day. It's not meant to be everyone skipping in and making best friends. And again, let's not have this unrealistic expectation of what the workplace should be. It's the workplace's responsibility to create an environment in which is safe and has that psychological safety, and which supports you and which gives you meaning. But it's your responsibility then to take ownership of your health, of your performance, of your development. And I think those two things can get a bit murky as well, and people almost have too high expectations sometimes, either way. So it comes down to trust, and the business putting the processes in place, being clear from the start. A lot of businesses make the mistake, they say one thing in the interviews or one thing in the job offer, and then it's a very different thing in the day-to-day.
I hear that all the time. Well, it's certainly one of my learnings over the last years, working with a new workforce, a new generation as well, is the importance of clear and shared expectations. Yeah. That misalignment of expectations is often the root cause of issues.
It's a waste of time for everyone. Yeah. It's a complete waste of time. And you're right with the newer generation as well, because we've got now 5 generations in the workplace. Each one of those have very different wants, have very different forms of communication, have very different needs. And none of them are wrong, but you need all 5 of these different groups to be able to communicate effectively with one another. And usually in the middle of all of them is the right way to go for a business, but you can't do that without difficult conversations and without honesty. Belonging, this is a huge one. If you're setting up a business in today, this does not mean everyone has to be a purpose-driven, mission-driven business, but this does mean every business has to have really clear values, and not just words on a kitchen wall, but actually this is who we are, this is how we show up, this is how we want to be. These are our values, and how do you as an individual align with them?
I've always thought values is not the most useful word for what we're describing. I've always tended to think of it as behaviours. Yeah. Because it's what you do, not what you say, that really represents who you are. Yeah. And particularly when they're challenged, particularly under stress, that's where you really learn
100%
what an organisation, what an individual is all about.
Yeah, 100%. And we've seen in the past year alone a 10% increase in individuals not taking a job because they don't believe the company's values align with them as individuals. So again, honesty. Really, who are you? What are you expecting? Is there going to be sacrifice? Be honest about that sacrifice.
It's that expectation calibration point coming up again.
And then development. And this can be personal or professional, but 39% of core work skills are going to change by 2030. I keep banging on this word uncertainty, but there's so much uncertainty in the world. How are you creating certainty for people? How are you making them feel that by coming into your workplace, they are a better person than when they weren't? And so that could be professional skills, and that can be AI skills, which a lot of people are looking towards. And particularly now, we've seen so many businesses not even take individuals on jobs if they don't have AI literacy. And this is going to cause huge issues and a whole different rabbit hole. But development, your professional development and your personal development. And I think this is as equally important right now, because we are in this age where everything is so instant, and every other LinkedIn post, or 90% of them are LinkedIn AI bots, and so much false data and so much nonsense out there, that the individuals who have the ability to actually put time and effort into things and put real human-based skills, and who can communicate effectively, who can show empathy, who can actually listen, who can have difficult conversations, they are the ones who are going to be able to really optimize in this AI world, because never have their skills become so important. And we switch off to laziness. Like, I personally can't tell you, as soon as I see on LinkedIn here's the thing, or the AI cadence, I'm like, hide, unfollow. We as human beings hate laziness, despite being inherently lazy creatures ourselves. And it's become really easy in today's age to be lazy. So as a business, how are you encouraging people not to be lazy? Smart, effective. Where are we utilizing these amazing tools we have? But where are we actually doubling down on our human-based skills, and how are you giving them that ability? And I think that becomes a business's superpower.
Yeah, I might be taking off on a slight tangent, but I think there's something really powerful in what you're talking about there, which is you described there and previously a bunch of qualities and characteristics that are really important in people within organizations today, and also how organizations can support those. One of the things I hear often from the business leaders that we get to talk to, I'm gonna group into one category, which is challenges around attracting and hiring the right people. How do you advise someone to go out, and what sort of things should somebody be looking for in a great person to bring into the team, and how can someone improve their chances of bringing in great people to the organization firstly? And I'd love to get into, and I think you part answered this already, the question of what people can then do to ensure that those right people flourish.
Yeah, it's a really good question. And again, it's not a one size fits all, because you have to really understand as a business, what sort of person do you need?
Yeah.
It's like dating. What works for you wouldn't work for me, wouldn't work for Sophie. Like, you really have to understand as a business, what are the skills you need from your people? Because if you're a really AI-driven, tech-heavy business, you probably don't need as much emotional intelligence from your people. You probably need them to be able to compute a lot of data very quickly, be really effective at programming, be content with working in isolated settings. What you need that person to be able to deal with, and the values they have, is going to be very different to a company who's trying to scale whatever they might be scaling, but has a very sort of customer focused, more people-led services business, which actually at this time really requires people to have those human-based skills.
Yeah.
So it really depends what you need as a business. But again, without repeating ourselves, it comes back to that being honest. Don't say you need one thing if you need something else. Don't say that, you are this really amazing, cool, great place to work, really, we love culture, you're going to have so much flexibility, but we're going to sometimes you're going to have to be here till 11 p.m. And that's just the way it is, because we work on X amount of time zones, we've got teams everywhere. Just be honest. Let people decide, is this something I want to show up to or not? And I think that's really the biggest mistake companies make. So as a company, whether you want to call it values or behaviours, actually really understanding what are yours. Because a lot of the time they think they know.
And what is it actually like to work here?
Yeah, exactly.
So that people can come in eyes open.
Exactly.
And it will attract the right people, and it will repel the people that it's not for.
And you're saving yourself a problem. It comes back to like dating. Stop pretending you're that person on the first date, and then 2 years later you're going through some messy breakup because you both tried to be something you're absolutely not, instead of just being honest about what you are. And there's a lot of sort of similarities between dating and talent attraction. Then on the other side, and then what can the business do? again, it focuses, how are you building psychological safety? So how are you ensuring that people feel like they can speak up? How are you, simple things like, what are your shared norms? What are your behavioural expectations? How do you ensure people know how they deal with conflict? What's the way you handle conflict? Do you have any mentoring, reverse mentoring, junior mentoring? Are you using first names in meetings? It's things like that can sound really simple that a lot of companies still get wrong.
It's the aggregation of marginal gains.
Yes.
Isn't it? It's lots of little touch points that all point in the same direction.
Exactly.
That aggregate up to something that defines the culture.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the most important things, role modelling.
Yeah.
Again, because if you're saying one thing and you're behaving in a different way, it's never going to create psychological safety. So how are you building the psychological safety? How are you...
Which is fundamentally trust.
Exactly.
And the ability for people to be vulnerable.
And be heard and feel like they're part of something. And then it follows into those three other factors: how you create integration, how you create belonging, how you create development. You do those four things, so you do them really effectively, and you're going to have a resilient, high-performing, innovative team. Simple as that.
Just some thoughts on sort of attracting and looking for the right people. I think what I heard in what you're saying and some of my experiences is the intentionality of it is knowing in your context what you're looking for. You may require different things to another business, but being really intentional and knowing that. For me, I think people under-index on what are referred to as soft skills. I don't think that's the right phrase, but I think people under-index on those and over-index on specific and hard skills. And I know for us here, for me, I think there are a number of universal qualities that we look for.
Yeah.
IQ, EQ, humility, and understanding we are team first.
Yeah.
Initiative and curiosity.
Yeah.
A work ethic,
huge.
to be frank. Someone who likes to take ownership and be accountable. Not everybody does, and that's such a fundamental part. Particularly, I think of smaller businesses that can't afford to carry people, that need everyone to be wanting to run with the ball. That
exactly.
give me the ball and I'll run with it. And I think these understanding the qualities that you're looking for in someone and understanding how you reinforce and promote those qualities within the organisation goes a long, long way.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it's such a good point. And I think also that on top of that, then, what biases are you holding? Again, there's 5 generations. So we're going to be interviewing people who've grown up in a very different world to what we grew up in. And we're potentially going to be leading people who have had many more years experience than we have, but in very different environments. And we as human beings naturally feel most comfortable with people like us, but that's not necessarily how you scale a business. And so it's
certainly not how you build great teams.
Totally. And there's a lot of, I guess, particularly with the younger generations, there's a lot of bashing. They don't do this, they don't do that, they're lazy, they don't have any resilience, blah, blah, blah. Yes, they come with different challenges, absolutely. They've grown up in a world where, we're talking about sort of, developed countries here, which is a privilege. But if we're looking at those sorts of countries, they've grown up in a world where it's easier to stay alive than ever before. They've grown up in a world where at tap of a finger, they have dinner, they have a date, they have a car. They haven't had to learn delayed gratification. They haven't had the privilege to learn resilience for many of them. And so we as the workplace have a huge responsibility to teach them these really key skills that they will need in life. And I believe they are such a hard working generation. And, most of my friends I speak to who are in their 30s, for example, if I could use my friendship group who tend to give me very honest feedback on these things, they really struggle. They really struggle to motivate. They really struggle to manage. And I try and say to them, but what are you doing to make them feel like they are part of something? What are you doing to make them feel like they're developing, that they're feeling heard? Because they have to understand they're not going to be CEO next week. They have to understand they can't work from Bali every other month. But we do have a responsibility as the generation above to actually teach them these skills that are going to make them excel in the workplace. And so again, it's a really interesting, I think, dance that we're having to take at the moment to balance those.
We're in a world of an overwhelming level of information, of comparison, of choice.
Yeah.
And so thinking of what it feels like to grow up in that world. And I really don't mean to speak as an expert in this area because it's not my expertise. I can only think from my experience of living in that and thinking through the eyes of someone who's grown up in that. I feel as an employer, it's really important to remind yourself that people are choosing every day. They're opting into being here, being part of this group, this team, in this role, do these things. And back to your previous points around engagement and fundamentally, what is engagement about? The way I define engagement in an ROI sense is it's about discretionary effort. It's the effort that maybe somebody doesn't need to give, but they choose to give. How do you reinforce discretionary effort constantly and don't take it for granted? And I think that's a shift, certainly in my perspective as a leader in running businesses today. You should not expect people to give that full effort. You should earn that full effort. And if you even think from that point of
100%,
that point philosophically, I think you stand a better chance of unlocking that with the whole team, regardless of generation, regardless of role, regardless of career experience. You're more likely to create a condition where somebody will choose to opt in, choose to give that effort, buy in, have that sense of belonging and everything else that we've spoken about.
Exactly. And again, like, if you have that really human lens to it, when you think about the world we're in, how many people are struggling mentally? How many people maybe don't feel valued, maybe don't feel supported, maybe don't feel like they have the correct social circle or the correct relationships. They don't feel like they're recognised. They don't feel like they're progressing. And so actually, as an employer, as a leader, if you're actually just taking 5 minutes out of your day to have a genuine conversation with someone, to say genuinely well done to someone, to ask them actually, how are you? And really listen to how they are, not underestimating the absolute transformative impact that can have, because actually how little of that so many sadly human beings have in this day and age, and just to build those genuine relationships.
So to close, I'd love to know a bit more about your work at the moment with Human OS, what you guys get up to, and also if there's anything you're working on or about to work on that you're excited about that you think is going to have a big impact over the next few years.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm pretty fortunate that I find all of our work exciting. And I think we're in a really exciting time, like we've discussed before, sort of off camera. And it's something about, I think we're all aware of for Human OS and for other solutions out there, and generally for workplace culture. There's been a lot of education that's had to go on as to the actual business importance of some of these areas and the real tangible returns that we see. And we're starting to see this shift from more forward-thinking businesses and businesses more generally about understanding the importance of culture, understanding the importance of all of the different variables we've discussed today. And really, I always say businesses are paying the price of poor culture, poor well-being, poor performance. It's just whether you're paying it silently or you're paying it proactively, and you actually want to get returns from the price that you're paying. And so I'm really, really excited for Human OS, that we're sort of at this precipice now. We're having really exciting conversations with very forward thinking and more wider businesses, really about how they can create sustainable high performance cultures. What does that mean? Really, how do they operate and penetrate these really competitive fields and a very competitive time that we are in, and really what is going to give them that secret edge. And so that for us is really exciting. It feels like a bit of a shift in the tide there. I'm really excited by the data piece, being a data nerd. I feel like we're at the very infancy in using data in the workplace, and actually as this matures over the coming years, what does that mean? How geeky can we get about this? And again, we're not there yet. There's a lot of hesitancy around data, what organisations can access, what can't they access, quite rightly so from the individual. We do a lot of education and a lot of safeguarding, and we put a lot of process in place to make this very anonymous and very safe, and it's why our engagement is so high, because people feel safe on the platform. But I think as we have more processes and there is more trust, there's some really fun things that can be done with the data, and using the data to really make informed business decisions that are actually going to give businesses the 1%. And also just how we're growing. When we started only a couple of years ago, we focused on 3 areas: mental health, physical health, and nutrition. And now we've got 12 different areas: perimenopause, financial wellbeing, mental health. And we want to continue getting deeper and deeper into these areas we know to be really important and to be key indicators of performance, but aren't necessarily widely discussed yet in the workplace. And I find that's quite exciting as well.
And if you're a leader listening to this and you want to find that competitive edge, where do you suggest someone starts? What's the first step?
As an individual?
Sure.
Firstly, like really understanding yourself, doing that individual audit, being really honest. Like, what do your days look like? Where are you wasting energy? Where are you engaging in anything that is taking you further from your goal, that is taking you further from where you want to be? Actually, and this is something I say in my coaching sessions all the time, so much change can occur not by doing anything more, but by simply eradicating what you don't need. Eradicating time wasted on social media, eradicating junk food from your kitchen, eradicating bad relationships that don't fill you and make you want to push yourself and make you believe in yourself and take you closer to a person you want to be. If we start being really honest and really brutal about what doesn't serve us, actually we become so much closer to where we want to be anyway. So I think
environment is everything.
Everything. And, as they say, environment dictates success, and it couldn't be more accurate. And then for a leader, not too dissimilar, but again, it's in that audit. It's about really understanding, where is your business at, or where is your team at? What are the genuine bottlenecks? What are the genuine weak points? Because it's great to be able to highlight your strengths, but being able to know your weaknesses is so much more effective. So having some form where you're actually getting that honest feedback from your team, like we spoke about earlier, it might be simple things. It might be simple, better communication. It might be healthier conflict resolution. It might be more recognition, but really just understanding, okay, where is our psychological safety? What is our baseline? Where are we at? And if you don't have the ability to do that, get the external support. And then picking one or two areas. Okay, these are my focus areas as an individual or as a business. What are the two areas that I need to really prioritize and work based on this information? How do I make them habit? How do I embed that into our culture? How do we live and breathe this? And then building it out gradually from there.
Well, Bianca, it's been a truly fascinating conversation. I know I've learned a lot, and I'm sure those listening have taken away, hopefully, some really practical and tangible pieces of advice that they can take straight into their personal performance or into their businesses. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure.
And where can people learn more about you and what you're getting up to?
humanos.co.uk is our website. They can find me on LinkedIn, Bianca Errigo, ERRIGO, and then bianca@humanos.co.uk. Almost forgot my email then. That's impressive.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Of course. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Leaders Circle podcast, a space for leaders, founders, and CEOs to learn, to connect, and to be inspired by the experiences of others. We'll be sharing more conversations with exceptional leaders and experts from across our community, so stay tuned for future episodes. In the meantime, to find out more about work life and the Leaders Circle, please visit our website, work.life. We'll see you soon.